Last week, I was unable to put out a top 10 list, so to make up for it, I've decided to do a special video edition of Top 10 Tuesdays this week. For those of you watching on YouTube, every Tuesday I do a top 10 list in written form over at GamingIrresponsibly.com, each week covering a different video game related topic. This special video edition will be a very personal topic for me, my top 10 favorite games of all time. Just to be clear, this is my list and my list alone. These are my favorite games of all time, and if you think I'm nuts, that's great. I'd love to hear opinions, and even better, hear other people's lists of their top games of all time. So, without further delay, here are my top 10 favorite games of all time. Halo 2 is not the best Halo game. In fact, not including Halo Wars, it may well be the worst. The campaign is very short, with a huge anticlimax, and the multiplayer has been improved upon greatly in subsequent games in the series. With that said, Halo 2 may be my most played game of all time. This game came out my freshman year of high school, and all throughout high school it was the go-to multiplayer game for my friends and I. At the time, I was really into shooters, and Halo 2 was the only game I needed. Multiplayer shooters don't really interest me as much anymore, and I don't think I will ever get into a multiplayer game to this extent ever again. Like I said, Halo 2 is by no means the best Halo game, but I have so many fond memories of marathon play sessions and all-nighters playing this game with my friends in high school, and that is enough to make Halo 2 my number 10 favorite game of all time. In my time as a gamer, there have been tons of games that I anticipated prior to release. At the time, Wind Waker was my most anticipated game ever. I simply could not wait for this game to come out, and I wasn't disappointed. Wind Waker was like a cartoon come to life, and was a much more lighthearted Zelda game. Sort of. What I really love about Wind Waker is how it differs from other Zelda games. Princess Zelda is not simply a plot device for Link to save in this game. She is self-reliant and independent, commanding her own pirate crew. The huge open sea with dozens of individual islands also gives this game a sense of scale, simply not present in other Zelda games. Wind Waker is one of the best games in one of my favorite series ever, and it truly deserves my number 9 spot. In the late 90s, I was a fan of both the Pokemon trading card game and the television show, and when I learned there was a video game on Game Boy, I just had to have it. I got the blue version, and it was actually my first ever RPG, even if I had no idea what an RPG was. At the time, I mostly played platformers and action-adventure games, so this new type of game was fascinating to my 9-year-old self. I don't recall the exact amount, but I'd wager I put hundreds of hours into both Pokemon Blue and Yellow. Pokemon Blue makes this list not only because it is an awesome game that I have great memories of playing, but because it helped expand my gaming horizons and introduce me to role-playing games, which I proudly call my favorite genre today.
Rise and shine, Mr. Freeman. Rise and shine. Not that I wish to imply you have been sleeping.
When my brother got Half-Life 2 for Christmas back in 2004, I never expected it would become one of my favorite games of all time. I was busy playing Halo 2 on Xbox Live at the time, but when I did eventually get around to playing it sometime in 2005, I was simply blown away. Our computer could barely maintain a steady 20 frames per second, but I hardly cared given how awesome the game was. In my opinion, Half-Life 2 is undoubtedly the best story-driven first-person shooter ever. The main game, combined with the 2 add-on episodes, is simply awesome from start to finish. I am generally opposed to silent protagonists, but Half-Life 2 pulls it off so well, I can't imagine playing it any other way. Half-Life 2 gets number 7 on my list, at least until Half-Life 3 comes out.
Here it comes! They're not gonna catch me off guard again.
In the early to mid-90s, I had a Sega Genesis, not a Super Nintendo, so I missed out on tons of great games on that system. As I got older and got more and more into gaming, I took it upon myself to try and experience as many games on the SNES as I could. I'm glad I did this, and I think it made me a better gamer for it. This introduced me to amazing games, like Super Mario World, A Link to the Past, Super Metroid, Final Fantasy VI, and my favorite game on the Super Nintendo and number 6 favorite game of all time, Chrono Trigger. I consider it to be the finest example of how great JRPGs can be, even if the genre isn't what it once was. Chrono Trigger is basically the antithesis to a lot of the poorer modern JRPGs. It is non-linear, it has multiple endings, a well-written, compelling plot, and a focus on deep, interesting characters that avoid becoming cliches. Even though many didn't, I even like the sequel, Chrono Cross, as well, but the original is still the best and earns the number 6 spot.
These are the closing days of the Third Era, and the final hours of my life.
I got a 360 at launch back in 2005, and after playing Call of Duty 2 and Perfect Dark Zero a little, I mostly used it to play Halo 2. That was until I happened to see The Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion at a local video rental place. I knew very little about the game, but I did know to be getting 9s and 10s from pretty much every video game website, so I decided to take a $9 risk and rent the game. When I returned the game 5 days later, I had over 40 hours played and went immediately from the rental place to GameStop to buy the game. Now, if you're wondering why I'm putting Oblivion on this list and not Skyrim, it's simply because Skyrim is too new. Skyrim is absolutely the better game, but this is my top 10 favorite games of all time, and Skyrim has been out less than 4 months. I have nearly 300 hours played in Oblivion compared to the 115 I have in Skyrim. Skyrim may eventually replace Oblivion on this list, but as it stands now, I don't feel comfortable putting such a new game on this list. Even so, I've enjoyed every second of the 300 hours I've played in Oblivion, and it definitely deserves the number 5 spot.
Shut up, weakling.
It's me, Mario!
Hello!
The Sega Genesis was my first ever video game console, but the Nintendo 64 was the first console I really got a lot of good games for. Aside from the Sonic games, I mostly had movie license games and kids games for the Genesis, the kind of games I didn't really know were bad until I got a little older. When I got an N64, things changed, and I consider the N64 to be my favorite console ever. While I have since played all the NES and SNES Mario games, at the time, Mario 64 was my first ever Mario game, and my first ever 3D game as well. Mario 64 is still one of the best examples of the 3D platformer genre, even though it basically created that genre. The gameplay just felt natural, even though it was a whole new way to play. Mario 64 was a revolution, and aside from the innovations it brought to the industry, it also changed me as a gamer. I became a Nintendo fan. I've owned every Nintendo console since, and will probably continue to buy every console they put out. And it's all thanks to Mario 64. The first game I ever played was Sonic the Hedgehog, and I immediately fell in love with the Sonic series and video games in general. Like I said, the Sonic games were probably the only real games I had on the Genesis, and they were absolutely my favorite. Sonic 3 and Knuckles is by far the best game in the series. Because Sonic Team didn't have enough time to finish the full Sonic 3, they split it into two games, Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles, which could be locked on with a special cartridge to play the full game as intended. Now, if a game developer split their game into two full-price games, released just months apart in today's market, there would be mass hysteria and fan outcry. But at the time, the lock-on concept was awesome. Sonic 3 and Knuckles is the biggest and best Sonic game, with tons of cool new features and innovative in-game scripted events that serve to tell the game's story, which is excellent for a 16-bit platformer. I absolutely loved the original Mass Effect, but there were just a few things that held it back. Mass Effect 2 fixed almost every issue I had with the first game, while taking only a few tiny steps backwards in some other departments. Mass Effect 2 had the same great writing, characters that were just as interesting, and continued the story of Commander Shepard and the Reapers, all while just being so much better from a gameplay perspective. The toned-down RPG elements like inventory and point distribution was a bit disappointing, but I hardly cared given the game was so much fun to play in addition to the compelling story. I have put well over 200 hours into this game across half a dozen characters, and I can't wait to play Mass Effect 3.
I'm sorry. I know that was important, but you performed Gilbert and Sullivan?
I am the very model of a scientist Solarian. I've studied species Turian, Asari, and Batarian. I'm quite good at genetics as a subset of biology because I am an expert which I know is a tautology. My xenoscience studies range from urban to agrarian. I am the very model of a scientist Solarian.
I loved this game from the moment I played it. Ocarina of Time was my first Zelda game, and it is still my favorite. I just love everything about this game. The story, the characters, the dungeons, the exploration, it's all awesome. Being only 9 years old when I first played this game, I found the puzzles and dungeons to be very challenging, but that was part of the fun. The first time I finished the game was such a moment of triumph, and I immediately wanted to play the game again. This is a game I pick up and play once a year or so, and to date I've probably completed it over 20 times. Ocarina of Time has been my favorite game for over a decade, and I honestly don't see any way it doesn't remain my favorite game forever. Well, there you have it, my top 10 favorite games of all time. While I may do future video top 10s, this was a special occasion, and next week it'll be back to written lists. So be sure to check out GamingIrresponsibly.com every Tuesday to see more.